Hello everyone, this video is for those who are wondering if they should get the 64 gigs iPad Air 2020, which is currently selling at US $599, or the 128 gigs iPad Pro, which is selling at $799. By the way, there's not going to be any side-by-side comparison because I sold off my iPad Pro 2020 a few months ago. So in this video, I'll just be talking about the feels, the feelings, because with Apple products, it always comes down to feelings. Even though some of their tablets, their specifications aren't as good compared to Samsung tablets, but people still buy iPads because it comes down to the feels. All right, my perspective will be one of a visual content creator, someone who uses the iPad for drawing, and I am a budget conscious consumer, so I value for money. So from my perspective, I would recommend you to get like the cheaper iPad. In this case, since I'm comparing the iPad Air versus the iPad Pro, I recommend the iPad Air because it's $200 cheaper. If I'm comparing the 10.2-inch iPad, the entry-level iPad with the iPad Air, I would recommend the 10.2-inch because again, it's cheaper. Me recommending the 10.2-inch iPad doesn't mean the iPad Air is not worth the money. All the iPads from Apple are worth the money, in my opinion. The iPad mini, the iPad, the iPad Air, and the iPad Pro. So Apple's strategy is basically to create an iPad at this at all sorts of price range, so that when people look into their wallet, they see how much money they have, then they can buy the iPad that they have the budget for. So if you have the budget of $600, that's where the iPad Air would sit. Now, if you can stretch your budget a bit, like go up to $750, in which case you can upgrade the iPad Air to 256 gigs of storage. The thing is, with the iPad Pro 11-inch, that's currently selling at US $799, which is just $50 more compared to the 256 gigs iPad Air. In that case, I would ask you to stretch your budget even more. Since you already want to spend like $750, why not just spend the extra $50 and get the 11-inch iPad Pro? Because you will have ProMotion. ProMotion basically makes the animation of the lines as you draw. It makes that animation smoother. However, that animation or the improved latency, that will depend on the app that you use. So if you use Procreate, you're going to get like really smooth animation and very little latency, very low latency. But if you use some other apps, maybe like MediaBank Paint Pro, in which case that app still feels like it's running on a 60 Hz display. So depending on the app that you use, ProMotion may or may not be visible. The effect of ProMotion may or may not be visible. But if you're using Procreate, then yes, you are going to see ProMotion in effect. Drawing with or without the 120 Hz ProMotion is not a big deal, at least for me. So currently I'm drawing on the iPad Air, which has a 60 Hz display. And when I'm drawing, I don't feel like the lack of ProMotion is affecting my drawing. The lines, they still appear to be quite smooth. Now, if you compare the iPad Air and the iPad Pro side by side, yes, you will notice that the animation of the lines on the iPad Air, they are going to be choppy, relatively speaking, but it's still very usable. The thing with drawing is we are usually not drawing at really high speed. We are just drawing at normal speed. So the gap between the line as it tries to catch up with the pen tip, that gap is not going to be very big. With the iPad Pro, there's going to be very little or almost no gap at all. But with the iPad Air, that gap is going to be very small. At least for me, it doesn't really affect my user experience. It's still very enjoyable to draw on this iPad Air. So the 120 Hz and the improved latency on the iPad Pro, it's not going to make you draw better or draw faster. It's just going to make you feel better. Hence the feels, but if you want to go with ProMotion, then prepare to spend an extra $200 over the iPad Air, because that's the entry-level iPad Pro that has the ProMotion. Both the iPad Air and the iPad Pro have very powerful processors, so they are more than sufficient for creating really complex drawings. The iPad Air has 4 gigs of RAM, the iPad Pro has 6 gigs of RAM, and a few days ago, Procreate has updated their app to increase the maximum number of layers you can create on the iPad Air. So now for a 300 dpi A4 size canvas, you can create 57 layers. The same number of layers you can create on the iPad Pro, which has 2 additional gigs of RAM. So now the iPad Air, it's basically as capable as the iPad Pro. The differences between the iPad Air and the iPad Pro don't really affect drawing. Things like there is no face unlock on the iPad Air. There's this fingerprint sensor which is built into the power button. I find that to be very effective. And there is no 4-way speakers on the iPad Air. There are only 2 speakers. When the iPad Air is in landscape orientation, the 2 speakers are at the bottom left and at the bottom right side. Audio quality is still going to be very good, so no worries there. It's still going to be stereo audio. 64 gigs of storage is actually sufficient for creating art. It may feel limiting in a year or 2, especially if you create art regularly, very consistently, in which case I would highly recommend you upgrade the storage or go with the 128 gigs iPad Pro. But if you are just drawing occasionally, 64 gigs of storage is actually sufficient. After you take into account the storage space taken up by iPad OS and the apps that you install, you'll still be left with around 35 to 40 gigs of storage, which is sufficient for creating art. Of course, 128 gigs is going to be better. Having more storage is definitely more functional compared to the 120 Hz refresh rate, because without storage you will not be able to make art, but without 120 Hz display you can still draw. My overall recommendation is this: if you have budget only for the iPad Air base model and the Apple Pencil, then just go for that. If you can stretch your budget, I recommend the 128 gigs iPad Pro instead. If you want to save money, you can wait and check out the Apple refurbished store to see if there are any refurbished iPad Pros or the refurbished iPad Airs, which are very likely to appear in 6 months' time. Yeah, you can save about 15% off official retail price with refurbished products. If you have further questions, let me know in the comment section below. Thanks for watching and listening. Bye.